So again, you went to Harvard.
Right.
3 degrees. Then you did financial?
Consulting, so I worked,
McKinsey, I think it was?
McKinsey after business school, a different one in between that was a little more academic in nature. But yeah, basically switched into business from CS academically.
And then when did you join the
DFJ, the dark side.
Yeah, the dark side. Yeah. You said it, I mean.
Yeah. So McKinsey was the first job that took me to the West Coast, and my wife at the time was just finished medical school, so it was kind of both of us moving to the Bay Area. In her case, it was UCSF. In my case, it was McKinsey. Which was a great learning environment. Almost felt like a continuation of the MBA, working with a lot of leading companies in a lot of different sectors, doing a lot of interesting things. That said, this was back in 97, 98, and if you recall back to these days, what we now call the internet, bubble, which at the time was the living in an almost surreal world where everything was supposed to change almost instantaneously through the availability of this next wave of great consumer technology we now know as the internet, was supposed to happen. It did feel surreal at the time. So here I was at McKinsey working with a lot of these large companies and feeling like I'm in the Bay Area, I have a computer science background, I'm a software kind of guy in terms of my thinking, I like platforms. Why am I, basically a hired gun for large companies? So I wasn't thinking venture capital at all. I was thinking I would join a startup.
Wow.
And I called my partner, Jennifer Fonstad, now, who at the time was an associate. She had started as a Kaufman Fellow straight out of business school at DFJ. And called Jen, and Jen, show me some of your cool companies. I'm doing a job search. I want to be exhaustive about it. McKinsey's good about allowing people to take some time while they're still getting paid to do a proper job search. So she was the one who, besides hooking me up with a number of different startups, of which, interesting side story, but ended up having a few offers from. But in parallel, she said, hey, you like this variety thing. You kind of seem to be more of a breadth versus depth kind of guy. I kind of know you. You got ADD a little bit. Why don't you come in and talk to the group? Because at the time, it was literally just 5 investment professionals. You might like it. So that was it. So DFJ, I was the only venture firm I ever interviewed with. And everything else was startups. I went in, met the team, and basically fell in love with the team. I met Steve Jurvetson, I met Tim, I met John Fisher, I met, so it basically just said, this is a team of people with whom I can see being excited, learning from, and working with every day. And for me, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, was growing and learning and developing through a group of people that I'm proud to call my team.
And so how things have changed since then?
Oh, well, to give you an idea, when I joined, the largest fund that DFJ had raised was $150 or $180 million or so. All together, they had maybe $500 million or maybe just under in committed capital. For fast forward to today, if you count affiliated funds, like $6 billion, so it's like a 10-to-1 sort of ratio across the years. Now the core team has remained, the core team here in Silicon Valley has remained small. Some folks have sort of come and gone in between. So that hasn't changed much, and the whole idea of small team of people who are passionate about different aspects of technology coming together and supporting each other and making better decisions for the behalf of, in the end, our limited partners. This hasn't changed. But what has changed quite a bit is obviously the sectoral waves and the different things that we've been interested in over time.
And you're looking at earlier deals, and
it's always been early. We now have a dedicated growth fund, so we can actually play on sort of both sides of the spectrum.
So then, is it DFJ
growth?
Gotham? Is that
in New York? So Gotham and Mercury and actually a total of 15 or 16 different firms are part of our DFJ Global Network. And there's been some confusion with respect to branding of who's called that and that. We've now finally that we have enough, and we have sort of enough best practices and professional practices around the network. Think of it more, it's going to be more as a Star Alliance kind of sub-brand, where each one of them is going to...
Trump letting people use this name for buildings?
Well...
I know what you mean. Star Alliance is a good analogy.
Yeah, because you need the best practices, you need the economies of scale, and you need certain things that actually does make sense to have local presence yet global understanding. And that was the point of the network to begin with. So it's going to be more... Gotham Ventures or Mercury Ventures or what have you, a member of the DFJ Global Network. And so in that sense, the core funds are the ones we have here. We've got our early stage fund, the Roman numeral ones. We have now our growth funds. We're in the second. They had a first close of the second fund, and the only other group moving forward that's going to have DFJ in the core kind of part of their name is going to be in Europe with DFJ Esprit.
And then also obviously Jabber University, which is
Tim's
little like, I guess
more than little. I mean, no, if you talk to Tim, it's a huge passion.
It's huge. So I guess when I grow up, I want to be Draper University. That's like my inspiration. No, but a couple of my friends from the Middle East are actually part of the program, and it's just amazing, like what he's doing with that. And we want to partner and collaborate. But it's funny because if you think about it, then you're all along the ecosystem, and from very, very early to like you said, growth now. So what about deals that you're looking at? Like, tell me a little bit about the process. I was listening to a panel yesterday, and people were saying, one guy was saying we don't have a website, and it's just we're kind of hidden. One guy said I will only take it if it's preferred. One guy was saying just events. How do you find your deals?
So I'll tell you, we don't believe. So there is this sort of word of wisdom about you only take them from referred sources, what have you. If we look at our history, DFJ as a firm, what is known for is for being around and backing whole hog emerging sectors and having the strength of our convictions to back emerging sectors before they're obvious. So that was the internet. When I joined, still in end of 98, beginning of 99, just being whole hog on the internet was considered to be cowboy. These guys are crazy. What is this internet stuff? Where's the revenues? Years later, when we did Skype, people thought we were crazy. I remember in board meetings going in and people making kind of fun of like, Skype with the revenue model. So backing trends before they're obvious. This is what people were saying. Clean tech before clean tech was an obvious place. This is what now with SpaceX and some of these space-focused investments that Steve's driving, people are very skeptical of that too. So make a long story short, identifying sectors that are right at the cusp of potentially opening up whole kind of new ecosystems of whether they be enabling platforms or application companies, doesn't matter, is the kind of thing that as a firm we try to pay a lot of attention to, especially on the early stage side. So that part hasn't changed. So as a firm, we're quite diversified. I mean, literally all the way from SpaceX and Tesla and new generation satellite companies and what have you, to even robotics and rethinking that, all the way to next generation communication platforms for, you mentioned about things that are relevant in the Middle East, a couple like Tango that I'm on the board of. I mean, you look at where they're lighting up users, similar to Skype and a lot of these other kind of new communication platforms, company, Hotmail before them, even before my time, you start seeing them all over the world. I mean, if this catches, it doesn't just catch in one place. It's seldom is it a one country phenomenon. If you talk about communications, it gets spread around quite a bit.
Did I see Mimeo?
Mimeo, sure.
So I know Mimeo. I was in the print world for a minute working on e-commerce solutions. So Chuck, super cool guy, and I really like Mimeo because it's kind of the hybrid between sexy startup and
See, I like these. So I'll tell you. You asked me about things I like. So. Business services and how we redefine or think about the delivery of business services that frankly a lot of times tend to be not sexy through technology platforms, whether it be the internet to find consumers or whether it be for Yodel, small businesses that in some ways behave kind of like individual consumers in many cases, to give them a way of transparently getting the power of marketing that the internet can bring to them in one throat to choke, so to speak. So simplifying that complexity that gets created through more and more technology getting added into the mix is hard, and if you can do it at scale and package it up in a way that people can consume in a business model that kind of makes sense to them, you can build huge companies that way. So the Mimeos of the world, the Yodels, we've invested in a small company called Zerv more recently that deals with companies like Xtime that deal with auto dealers. You're coming in these unsexy spaces, and if businesses start depending on you to run their own business better, they're happy to cut you into their profits.
Well, and because most of those businesses have been stuck in like the dark ages.
Exactly.
And they're not innovators. They will never innovate internally, and so what I feel now, it's almost like if you have a good UI, UX, and kind of a sexy startup spin to something, you can innovate. You know, again, print to me was not sexy, but it's a $600 billion business
huge
around the world. You know? It's bigger than the airline industry.
That's right.
So I know a little bit about print because of the time I spent there. But okay, so tell us a little story. Like we do storytelling here because people in the Middle East like hearing stories, and that's how they learn. But tell us a story, like a personal story, ideally that you haven't told before, about one of the topics that we discussed.
So there's venture capital is a set of stories, right? One after the other, all the way from little companies to.
Yeah.
So for me, one of the very first, I think it was literally, either if not the first, the second investment I ever got involved with was a small company called, well, at the time it was just an idea, called Hippocrates. Hippocrates was, still is. The company went public and now is acquired by another one of our portfolio companies called Athena. But Hippocrates was, at the time of the Palm 2s or Palm 3s, had the vision of creating a better point of care experience for physicians. Bring the information to them, the kind of stuff we were talking about before, push versus pull.
Yep.
Bring the information at the point of care in a way that physicians could very quickly get information around things like pharmaceutical dosing, drug-drug interaction, side effects, things like that. Not by looking up in books and doing half an hour research when they're busy and they can't do that, but rather bring it in the power of this cross-referenced internet thing that was happening at the time. Bring it in front of them in a mobile device. And we literally met these guys when they were at Stanford still. They hadn't even graduated yet. And it frankly was brought to us by a couple other VCs that were more in the medical space and wanted some more, let's say, internet experience into the mix, which is how I got involved with it, and because my wife's a physician and I had an interest in this whole thing. So the interesting story there in terms of adding value is helping them find their first office. And they literally had no place. They wanted something really cheap. So we ended up finding the office that another one of my portfolio companies, Everdream, I guess technically that was my first investment, had just vacated, which was an old modified warehouse right down the street from where we were in Redwood City at the time before we had moved to Sand Hill. And the office was great, except the big problem it had was the bathroom was in the middle and was very noisy. And so you couldn't, the whole office would kind of, pay attention to what was going on.
There.
Yet, some of their best ideas and the fact that they all had to kind of focus on what they were doing instead of the noises that were happening around them allowed them to really pay great attention to getting that very first prototype out, that even on Palm 3 devices that were not, exactly the paragon of functionality at the time, got them on the map. And within 6 months, they were the talk of the town with the doctors. And so I got to see how literally it was my first experience from an idea in the minds of students at Stanford, how you could come out, put them in a totally, as bad a space as you can think of, with a bathroom in the middle and all the noises that entails. And yet still, if people are true to their vision, they can make it happen in the worst of possible situations. That was the big lesson there for me. And so since then, what that's meant for me is less than looking, like you were saying before, about who referred it and what's the pedigree of the CEO and how much gray hair do they have and how many, whether they've been to Harvard and whatever, which means nothing, is really more about how passionate are they and how driven are they and how good of an idea do they have to the point where they can convince me that they will drive through walls to make their idea a reality. Those are the folks we want to back.
Yeah, I've driven through a few walls. I think I've got a few more coming, but you're right.
You're looking good health for that. It's good.
I agree. That's cool. And so, let's ask a funny question. Like, which part of this, like, your job, do you not enjoy?
Yeah.
What's like a pain?
So it used to be more of an issue. I've managed to compartmentalize better. But look, the issue with venture capital, especially if we have a large portfolio, is that at any given moment, there's at least one crisis or one firefighting exercise going on. As I sit here today, there's like 2 things going on. No, but that's the point, is there's always that. And you could say, well, that's good and bad. It's bad in the sense that you can never really turn yourself off. Like all these ideas about out of office notices and I'm out of touch and whatever, it just does not work for this show. You have to be on all the time. Then again, That's the exciting part about it. It's more than a job. It's more than a 9-to-5 thing. You, in every conversation you are, in everything you're doing out there, when you're picking up your kids at school, having a conversation with someone, you're always thinking about how can I be helping? How can I be putting things together? So you could say it can be overwhelming, but on the other hand, it's kind of what keeps us going. So maybe I didn't quite. If you want me something really, I mean, I'll tell you you asked about firing people before. It's never easy to let people go.
Which brings up a really, really good point. The entrepreneurs in the Middle East do not understand the concept that they can get fired from their own company.
Yeah, I hear you.
Let's talk about that really quickly because it's just happened. You know, Groupon, Andrew Mason.
Yeah.
Like it happens, not all the time, but it does happen, right?
Sure.
And so, like that concept, like I started a company, I'm CEO. I'm founder. Like, I get fired. Like, how does that work? Like, what have you been in that situation?
Oh yeah.
And in that moment, like, what are you thinking?
Few things. I haven't been in a situation where I was fired as the founder, but on the other hand, and this is something that is a good conversation to have right up front. This goes back to what I was saying before. There's plenty of funding sources, including family and uncles and your own bootstrap or friends and family or angels or others who frankly would love to help people and may help them occasionally but have no interest in being a true partner in the governance sense of the word. So if someone wants to build a small business or wants to build a lifestyle one or cares more about the ego part of running their own business than they do about having to make their idea a reality and really huge, then I would say taking money from venture folks like us may not be a good idea. Because almost by definition, these deals are standard, these investments are standardized enough to involve things like, in the Western world, we call boards of directors and independent kind of judgment that is above and beyond the function and role of the chief executive officer. Yet you see plenty of the founders saying, and those are the kinds of people I was talking about before, the Hippocrates guys being a good example. We had a CEO in there, and they were very clear about the fact that they would need to hire a CEO to make their idea a reality, but they were so passionate about the need to build this product and make that idea and get it going, that to them it was more about how do I change the world and make it a better place because of what I have in mind versus am I doing this or are you doing this or who is doing it?
And I think that's I mean, I know several, so Wendy Lee from Get Satisfaction is going to come. She was brought on to help grow the company. Leah from TaskRabbit. Stepped aside. I mean, not getting fired is one thing, but then stepping aside and saying, you know what, like there's no ego. There's someone else who could do a better job to build out that vision. I mean, that's a interesting kind of conversation. Or like, I haven't been in a boardroom where someone's gotten fired, but that's got to be pretty tough. You know, a tough decision on both parts. If I'm the CEO and saying, okay, I'm going to step aside and not let my ego get in the way, and then on the other hand, like board's like, okay, you're not doing your job, and so.
I think the ones that are really the harder ones, and that's where the true founders and the true kind of people who think of the idea and who think of the value and how they're changing the world through what they're building comes before their ego. It's easy if things are off the rails. If things are off the rails and clearly are failing in some kind of objectively, understandable, clear way, like Andrews, you mentioned Andrew from Groupon. I thought his letter was on the one hand really funny and sort of self-deprecating yet insightful, but also in a sense he was kind of saying, "Wait, guys, look at the numbers. I mean, you can't argue with kind of some of the things that are going on here." And so in the end, it's not like I had to be convinced about the fact that certain things were not going the way they were supposed to be going. So I'd say situations where you've got external or otherwise easily measurable kind of ways of telling that things are off the rails based on expectations are the easier kind.
Well, your stock being
that's right, exactly.
An obvious one.
The harder ones are the things that are actually fine, but we all think they could be going to the next level and could be something else. And those are really tough, because frankly, most people's reaction is sort of first do no harm, and if it's ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. So I think that's the one area where as boards of directors, I wish, and I'll take a lot of the blame myself. I mean, every time when we make something happen, we look back and we say, oh, the signs were all there, we should have done it sooner. Hindsight's 20/20, et cetera, et cetera. Yet still, it's an area where educating and working together with founders, with others, to kind of think about what are the signs now where things are off the rails, but when we believe could be going differently, and having the foresight and the strength of character to be able to do that before it's obvious, those are the hard ones.
Yeah. Huh. Hindsight, yeah. It's interesting. I've been in a few board meetings, and to be honest, a few of them I thought were a little bit of fluff, where people just wanted to talk about numbers to get the board to back off. But then I can say, like, I've been involved in a couple board meetings where it's like just, look, this is what you gotta do. Like, stop fiddling around with this. Stop trying to do 7 things at once.
Right.
Like, just like the simple ones. But I've yet to experience one where someone's getting fired. So
it doesn't usually, by the way, happen.
Doesn't?
To be perfectly clear, it usually doesn't happen in formal board meetings.
Okay,
No. It usually happens. The decision might be taken in some board-like form, or executive session, or what have you, or even special kind of session. But usually, from a sort of human perspective, it usually tends to be either one-on-one or small-to-one. It's not a. I mean, I don't know how it happens in big public companies, and they may have a process by which, but even there, it's typically more of a few people get designated to be the ones having that conversation.
So let's kind of wrap up with one thing. You mentioned the marriage and doing how do you have kids?
3, yeah.
How do you find the balance? Like, I just got married.
Yeah, congratulations.
And I'm doing like 14-hour days, and all I hear my wife talk about is baby, 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 and I'm like, so basically then I wouldn't sleep at all, and it's with 3 kids.
Yeah.
How do you find balance, and how are you able to shut off? Which leads me to my final thing I want to say is, I'm going to do this thing called Disconnect It, which is an anti-social network, which is people disconnect. So I'll send you.
Yeah, hook me up on that, because I want to. My wife's one like you, one of the few people who actually refuses to get on Facebook.
I have ADD, and I would I would spend more time on that than.
That is her concern as well.
Okay, good.
So in terms of balance, look, balance for I think unless you make balance like right up there in terms of your life goals, especially in a Western society like this, is the first one to go. It's the easy one that people are willing to give, especially if, like in our business, if you're in a service type industry of any kind, like where you feel like I win by helping others, it's easy to kind of lose that. So you almost have to engineer it in. Now the good news with having kids is they'll do it for you, right? There's certain things like school play, like there's certain things that once they're there, they're not fungible. They're not like I could do the extra hour or not, because those you can always, justify it. The ones where they're fixed and they're on the calendar, they'll do it for you. So I highly recommend going ahead and doing it, because believe me, your mental and everything else will adjust to take care of it kind of almost automatically. So that's, I think, the biggest insight I've had on that.
That's cool. And then so we wrap it up with, we do this thing called old rules. It's like the one rule you live by.
Be straight with people. If I had like, you can deliver, and especially in my business, you can deliver bad news, you can have emotionally charged conversations, you can have outright fights with people and huge disagreements and all that.
Just no fluff.
Be straight. Tell them what you really think. It's too hard to maintain what did I tell whom, especially in a job like this.
Yeah, totally.
So being upfront and treating people, I know it's a cliche, but treating people like you'd like to be treated if you were on the other side is the most important single rule I can have.
Yes, no, maybe, whatever it is.
It can be maybe too. In many cases, this may be. It doesn't mean force yourself to take a position where you yourself are conflicted. You tell them you're conflicted, but you problem solve it together. What you don't do is try to manage someone. You try to treat as if they're a puppet that you can pull the strings off.
Very cool. Andreas, I want to thank you for taking the time. As I mentioned, we're putting together this accelerator program, so if you can pencil in a couple hours. And
absolutely.
For our teams that are coming here, we'd love to have you involved. And again, we're talking to someone at Draper University to build a channel there. But I want to thank you again. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me. It was fantastic. Thanks for the tea and the treats.
Have a piece of it. We won't tell anybody.
I will have a piece, because I'm too tempted.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Peace. We'll see you next episode.